Alright folks, how you doing? Blinking hell, it's warm out there. I'll tell you, the sun is in full force today, which is pretty unusual for Scotland now. I do have to kind of apologise before I get into this, because I'm kind of going to be all over the place in this video, because in my own mind I'm well all over the place with this subject. But I have to tell you, this symbol here, the lion, it does not represent the House of Stuart. It represents something far older and more powerful than that, and more prestigious. It actually represents the sun. This is the symbol of Aton. The cult of Aton was all about sun worship, solar worship. It was a sun cult. Now, yesterday, talking about being out in the sun, I was down at Linlithgow filming for my virtual tour down there. The Union Canal and Linlithgow. And in fact, on Saturday, I've booked myself in to go on the cruise that goes all the way to the Avon Aqueduct and back. So I've got that to look forward to. I arrived a little bit early yesterday. I arrived at 11:05, which was stupid on my part because the canal centre doesn't open until 1:30. So I found myself with 2.5 hours to kill, and not a whole lot of ideas on how to kill it. So I just went wandering around basically, and it's kind of a good thing in a way. It worked out because I went to a lot of information points and took a lot of photos and things. Learned a lot of information that I wouldn't have otherwise. But one thing I came across was the statue of St. Michael, and St. Michael is all over Linlithgow. He's the patron saint of the town. And I started to think about who St. Michael kind of represents, like in mythology. And St. Michael represents Zeus, I've found. Now, Scotland, in my opinion, is very much the land of Zeus, or the land of Thor. It just depends on what you want to call him. And I was looking at the statue of St. Michael spearing the dragon, and it didn't cross my mind at the time. In fact, it didn't cross my mind until I was walking back from Scotland just now, about 3 minutes ago. But St. Michael killing the dragon adds up synergistically to what I was saying about J.K. Rowling, how the Harry Potter series was the thinly veiled version of the Trojan War, how the solar cult defeated the dragon cult. So St. Michael killing the dragon or killing the serpent is like the followers of the cult of Aton, the solar cult, fighting against the cult of the serpent, and because this is what St. Michael is famous for, killing the dragon. So this all adds up to the Trojan War, the followers of the lion, the solar cult in Britain, the Welsh and the Scots, going to war against the North Germans, because according to Collins Beaumont, the Trojan War was actually fought in the north of Europe. And it is my belief that Agamemnon, Aga means king, it's like a title, King Memnon was actually King Arthur. And King Arthur, through in Edinburgh you have King Arthur's Seat. King Arthur was Zeus. So Zeus was actually a person who lived. He was a king. He was a British king who fought against the serpent cult and defeated them in war. In fact, we know all about this war. Everyone's heard of it. It's called the Trojan War. Notice, by the way, in the movie Troy, they got a Scottish actor to portray Agamemnon. I'm sure that's not a coincidence. Brian Cox. In the real life, by the way, Agamemnon was quite a bit younger and fitter. No offense to Mr. Cox. But, King Memnon, Agamemnon, Lord Memnon, he was the one who led the solar cult to victory against the serpents. And like I said, look at Harry Potter, Harry's got the lightning bolt scar, which, the lightning bolt represents King Zeus, So Zeus was a real king. In fact, we've all heard of him. Even school children have heard of him, but they haven't realised it because it's King Arthur. King Arthur is Agamemnon. Agamemnon is Thor. Thor is Zeus. And St. Michael, and other characters, they're thinly veiled caricatures of Zeus. This is King Zeus. This is who he is. And Linlithgow was the capital of West Lothian and the capital of Scotland at one point. And it's known as the Royal Borough. You think that's only to do with Mary Queen of Scots being born there? It's called the Royal Borough because their patron saint is the king of the gods, King Zeus. That's the reason. That's the real reason, at least. That's the reason why. Because this all ties in with Zeus, and it's all kind of provable. It would take me a lot of videos to unpack all this. I'm just going at a harebrained off the top of my head level in this video, but when you put it all together, it adds up. It makes perfect sense. King Arthur's Seat, Arthur's Knot at Stirling, the Round Table. I've actually got a book back there in the cupboard there that talks about how the King's Knot, at Stirling lines up with the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and lines up with the Temple of the Four Winds in Athens. Like, synergistically lines up on purpose. You know, Stirling is a very interesting place. It's got the Black Pyramid, you know, all this sort of thing, and there's a connection with the cult of the lion, the solar cult. It all ties in. All these connections are there. They're all there if you can kind of open your mind up to it. But it all ties in. You know, it reminds me actually of when I was down at Stirling Castle. You know, I was asking about, you know, like Mary Queen of Scots when I was down there. It turns out that Mary Queen of Scots was descended from the kings of Jerusalem. I mean, like the Crusader state. I mean, probably the biblical one as well, actually. You know, like red hair is a sign of royalty. All the royals had red hair. Mary Queen of Scots was red-haired. Queen Elizabeth II was red hair. You know, her father, Henry VIII, had red hair. Even King David himself of Scotland had red hair, reportedly. All the royals have this kind of reddish red hair. So when you see Prince Harry, you know, with red hair, that's genetic. That's not because James Hewitt was his father. It's because red hair runs in the royal family line. You know, it's one of the signs of royalty. You know, it's famous, very famous for that. You know, and the fact that, you know, when you watch movies like Trainspotting and you see clips like this.
It's shite being Scottish! We're the lowest of the low! The scum of the fucking earth!
Well, not in real life. In real life, the you know, the bloodlines, all the sort of thing, the line that Mary Queen of Scots was descended from, like one of the most powerful lines in Europe, they were obsessed with Scotland. Okay. You know, like David Icke talks about in like his books, like The Biggest Secret and all this, that you know, bloodline royals are obsessed with Scotland because it has connections with the Hollow Earth. It all ties in. All ties in. Like not Mary Queen of Scots, sorry, Queen Victoria, I should say even. Her husband, Prince Albert, was obsessed with Scotland. Loved it. There's a statue to him in Charlotte Square. And if you go into Edinburgh, there are 3 locations where you can see the Sphinxes. One of them is Parliament Square. One of them is Charlotte Square, where Prince Albert's statue just so happens to be. Wink, wink, coincidence, I'm sure. And there's also one on top of the Royal Gallery, where Queen Victoria's statue is. It's surrounded by Sphinxes. Yeah, you can't make it up. And actually, if you look at King Arthur's seat from a certain angle, it actually looks like a Sphinx. From a certain angle, if you're coming in from one side, it looks exactly like the Sphinx. There's even a theory the Sphinx was based on King Arthur's seat. And of course it's a lion. You know, the old name for the Scots was the Cati, the cat people, in other words, the lions. Collins Beaumont talks about this in his books. You know, how the people of the lion, the people of the cat, it goes all the way back to Deuteronomy in the Bible. It's talking about the Scots, the lion kings. You know, how the Phoenicians were descended from the Northerners and they moved down into the Mediterranean and Egypt and all that. And there's all these depictions. You go to any of these castles, like Stirling Castle, like Edinburgh Castle, like just pick one at random. Just pick any castle and look at the tapestries on the wall. It's all Greek myths and Bible stories that are up on the wall on the tapestries. Yeah, because these people knew who they were. They know who they are. We don't know who they were, but they sure as hell knew who they were. Look at all the statues. You know, look at, on one side you've got all the demons, and on, you flip it around, on the other side you've got all the angels. Yeah, because Zeus, yeah, King Thor, Zeus, whatever you want to call him, you can call him whatever you like. Call him King Arthur. St. Andrew was also Zeus, as was St. George, slaying the dragon. It's just different versions. It's just different ways of telling the same story. St. Michael and St. George were the same person. They were both St. Michael. St. Michael was them. Killing the dragon. It's symbolic. It's metaphorical. It's the solar cult. You know, the lions. One day I'll get that right, I promise. But it was the cult of Aton versus the cult of the serpent followers. The serpents, by the way, symbolically stood for firearms. It stood for weapons. The serpentine cult was one of death. It was one of death and destruction. It's kind of like in Star Wars, the dark side versus the light sort of thing. Well, the side of the Jedi were the solar cult. Whereas the Sith are like this. You notice Palpatine kind of looks like a reptilian? Not a coincidence. You know, he's got the yellow eyes like a snake, like a reptile. He looks reptilian. He looks, you know, like a cold-blooded reptile creature. That's not a coincidence. You think that's coincidental? Not in your life, sunshine. Anyway, thanks for watching.